Library Affairs at Duke, and I'd like to welcome you to the second year of the biennial Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel Visiting Filmmaker Series. Duke University established this series in 2010. The series features artists whose work addresses significant contemporary topics of social, political, economic, and cultural urgency. Filmmakers chosen to participate have a recognized body of work and show promise of future contributions to documentary filmmaking. Visiting filmmakers are invited to Duke for a 2-day residency, giving faculty and students an opportunity to engage with them. The Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel series is unique in its exclusive attention to documentary filmmakers with a global perspective. By giving Duke faculty and their students an opportunity to explore the films of socially engaged filmmakers and discuss the work with them, we hope to inspire and encourage the next generation of documentarians. The conversation this evening focuses on the extraordinary work of award-winning documentary filmmaker and 2012 recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant, Laura Poitras. We are very fortunate to have Laura with us this evening, and she'll be introduced by Dr. Diamonstein-Spielvogel in just a few minutes. I'd like to say a few words about Barbaralee, who has been a great friend of the Duke Libraries and Duke University. You have a rather longer description of her many achievements in your program, but I'll just say a few things. Throughout her long career, Dr. Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel has served as a defining voice on major urban issues of our time and is a pioneering advocate of the arts. She is the author of 20 books and numerous magazine and newspaper articles. Interviewer, producer of 9 television series, and curator of 7 international museum exhibitions. The recipient of numerous honors and awards, Dr. Diamonstein-Spielvogel was named the vice chair of the New York State Council on the Arts in 2008. In 2012, she was appointed to advise the Port Authority on the integration of public art and architecture into the World Trade Center site. Duke University launched the Diamonstein-Spielvogel Video Archive in 2008, and Dr. Diamonstein-Spielvogel's personal papers are housed at Duke University's David M. Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library. She is married to leading international business executive and former U.S. ambassador to the Slovak Republic, Karl Spielvogel. This series reflects the strong and deepening relationship among the David M. Rubenstein Rare Book and Manuscript Library, the Center for Documentary Studies, and the Program in the Arts of the Moving Image, all co-sponsors of tonight's event. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Deborah, for all that you do and for those generous words. And thank you, Kirsten Johnson, Caroline Muglia, and Ruth Cody, for all you have done to make this program possible. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Laura Poitras, one of America's most important nonfiction filmmakers, a social documentarian, director, producer, editor, conceptualizer, political activist. She is also a long-term friend of Duke University's full-frame documentary film program. Laura is the recipient of many honors and awards, and I'd like to share some of them with you. She is the recipient of the 2011 Cinema Eye Honor for Outstanding Achievements in Direction for her landmark film, The Oath. Nominated for a Best Documentary Feature, nominated for an Oscar for a Best Documentary Feature, and twice for an Independent Spirit Award. Her very long list of credits and honors include a Peabody Award in 2003 for her documentary Flag Wars about gentrification in Columbus, Ohio. Her 2010 film, The Oath, about 2 Yemeni men caught up in America's war on terror, also won the Excellence in Cinematography Award for a U.S. documentary at the 2010 Sundance Film Festival. This past spring, she played an important role in the Whitney Museum Biennial of Contemporary Art. Her work focused on the shift in global politics that occurred after 9/11. And as you heard, just 3 weeks ago, on October 1st, 2012, she was named a winner of what has been referred to as the Intellectual Lottery, the celebrated MacArthur Award, for her much admired work. It is a prize that one does not, cannot apply for, an award that is the stuff of fantasy. The surprise grant came after exhaustive research to select winners by the MacArthur Foundation and carries with it a liberating, no strings attached, $100,000 a year for 5 successive years. It is good to see this honor go where it is so deserved. Our warm congratulations. Now, what changes do you think this recognition, this validation will bring to your life as a female filmmaker in a mostly male world? How do you envision this opportunity will affect you and your work?
Well, I mean, I'm still in a bit of shock about it, and so I still expect to wake up and think that, you know, that it was a dream. But when I got the call, the first thing I thought is that it provides, you know, it provides me freedom to work, and it also provides a recognition, and not just recognition for the work, but because I've been doing this work that has been sort of trying to document America post 9/11, I've had some pushback from the government, which results in me being stopped when I travel and detained at the border.
We'll talk about that.
So I know I didn't mean to jump into it, but when I was on the phone, which I have good reason to believe is tapped, I thought, well, this is a good conversation for them to hear. So that was sort of my first thought, and that because as a journalist, you're asking people to entrust the most precious things. I mean, the people are at risk, and so it felt like it provided protection not just for me, but for the people that I film with, and so it provided a layer of protection. So that was my immediate response to it.
Well, what difference besides time to think can you imagine?
Well, I mean, it allows me to continue to do the work and not have to go through, you often have to, so I'm working on things that are really sensitive, and so I have to oftentimes not send emails about what I'm working on, and I feel very uncomfortable submitting some of my material to funding agencies because I need to keep the material confidential until I'm ready to make it public. And so this allows me to continue to do that, to be able to work in sort of parameters that protect the work and protect me.
Cinema Eye, the organization that advocates for artistry and craft in nonfiction filmmaking, vigorously protested to the Department of Homeland Security their treatment of you and what was described as constant harassment. You have been detained, interrogated, and had your cameras and computers seized by the department as you attempted to re-enter the United States. For how long has this been going on?
It began in 2006 after I finished a film I made about the war in Iraq, is when I started getting detained by the US government returning to the country. So it's 12 years now.
What prompted
6
the
years
harsh
now.
response of Homeland Security?
Well, is there anyone from Homeland Security here who can answer that question?
No, I was hoping.
I mean,
I was hoping they were listening and would find this
right.
a good conversation too.
They would find this a good conversation. Yeah, they don't tell you why you're put on a list, and yet they detain you and they question me about where I've been and who I've spent time with. And my first response, I was naive, and I thought, well, it's a mistake, that they'll realize that I'm a journalist and that it's a mistake and that'll be taken off the list. And in the course of the last 6 years, I've become a little bit less naive, and I realized that actually it's very consistent that I'm put on a list, that it's part of other things that the government has been doing in the realm of national security. So if people are following the targeting of whistleblowers by the government, they have also been attacked, and journalists, like really respected journalists like James Risen from the New York Times, has been subpoenaed. So there's been this, it seems to be part of a larger logic of the direction. So now I'm less naive. I realize I'm making a film about America post 9/11, and sort of the fact that I've gotten sort of caught up in that is actually quite consistent with what's happening.
The trajectory of your work is an unusual one, particularly because you began in another field where you worked for 6 or 7 years that appears to me to require fierce attention to detail and a willingness to serve others. How did your early career eventually lead to your current work, and how does a fine chef become a hot-button filmmaker? What was the catalyst?
Yeah, growing up, I actually thought I was going to be a chef, and that was my goal. And when I was 19, I got a job in a really good restaurant and sort of worked my way up, and spent about 6 years working very seriously in kitchens. And then I moved to San Francisco, and I was working at a restaurant there, a restaurant called Mossa's. It was a very nice, very nice restaurant. And I started taking film classes at the San Francisco Art Institute, and it opened up different doors. I mean, that there were more tools for expressing ideas visually than what I could do with food. I mean, food is ultimately limiting in terms of what you can say with it. Like how would you address war with food? You really can't. So there's
some households that does it.
So I fell in love with cinema, and it wasn't a surprise in the sense that I've always been, that's what I did growing up. I watched movies. I always wanted to watch movies, but I didn't think I could make movies. There was a sense that making movies requires a lot of people, a lot of resources, and I was sort of worked more in a solitary way. And then when I was at the San Francisco Art Institute, I learned a different type of filmmaking where you can shoot your own work, you can edit it, and present it, and work in very, with very sort of limited crew and people and resources, and I fell in love with it, and so I shifted. But when I have anxiety dreams, it's about cooking.
Like what?
Like that it's 6 o'clock and I'm not set up. I mean, those are the anxiety dreams. Like I don't have that many anxiety.
A specific food?
Just,
what was your specialty?
Well, I worked in different places in the kitchen. So I was apprenticing, so I worked my way around. So I did, appetizers, sauces, meats, fish, and I did pastry for a long time. But there was always a race to get ready at 6 o'clock. So when the customers came in and the first order came in, you were ready for that order. And it was every day a race to get there. So my anxiety dream is it's 6 o'clock and I'm not ready for the customers.
It the same thing in making a film, that there are constant deadlines where you have to hurry up and generally wait, but
honestly, filmmaking is much more forgiving than cooking is. You doesn't matter if it was a great day yesterday. It's every day, and those sorts of deadlines are really, in filmmaking, you can take days off, you can take time to think things through, but it was a good teacher, because it teaches you this kind of, you don't know what's going to happen that day, because there were ingredients that would come in and you didn't know what was going to be thrown at you, and you have some skill sets, and you have whatever taste that you like, and then you would just hope that you would come up with what to do with these ingredients. And so it teaches you a kind of creativity and a trust and creative process, which I think is probably useful. And it also, even though the stakes were never as high in a kitchen as they are if you're making a documentary film, any documentary film, not just in a conflict zone, in kitchens, somehow the stakes are incredibly elevated. Like you actually think that you're dealing with, matters of critical importance in life and death situations if you mess up. So,
but in addition, with films, you are in charge.
Right. Yeah. It's a different thing. And I mean, I just think in the end, for me, it was. about creative expression and art. And although there are some cooking that rises to the level of art, I don't know that all of it does. And in terms of the range and capacity of what you can say, it's a very different.
Well, moving forward, in your 2003 film, Flag Wars, you look at urban gentrification in a community in which white, gay homebuyers threaten to displace working class families. In 2010, Bruce Norris' play, Clybourne Park, won the Tony for Best Drama on Broadway in 2012. The play is about race, real estate, and the volatile values of each during a 50-year period. What is interesting to me is that the issue remains the same, remains timely, and a satire about presumably nice people when their goals clash. What motivated you to do your film so many years earlier that deals with similar issues, and how did you confront them?
The film you're talking about is called Flag Wars, and it was made in collaboration with a colleague, Linda Good Bryant. And she was actually the director, and I was the co-director. And I was a cinematographer, she was editor, so it was very much a collaborative film. And the original inspiration for it is Linda was from this neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, which used to be the wealthy neighborhood, and then Jewish people moved in, so then the WASP left. And then after the 50s, then blacks started to move in, and then the Jews went to the suburbs, and then it became a black neighborhood. Beautiful real estate, and when Linda went home, it's where she's from, she was born there, and she went home for Thanksgiving, and there were lots of rainbow flags in her neighborhood in downtown Columbus, and she just asked her dad, what's up with the rainbow flags? And he said, well, that's what the gay people are hanging when they move in. And she was like, it was news to her that this was happening. And then the black residents were then hanging African nationalist flags. So it's a very, very quiet neighborhood with these sort of staking out of territory with these flags. So it was cinematically really quite interesting. And Linda and I were friends. We'd been doing independent work. And she came home and told me the story. And we just thought, like, this is a really fascinating idea to tell the story. And we were interested in it because it kind of flipped some of the typical documentary subject matter. So usually documentaries about marginalized people celebrate, like, celebrate who they are in a marginalized society. But this film actually looked at sort of the underside of that, which looked at the gay community, which is very marginalized in Ohio and needed a place to go. They were not sensitive to the black residents that they were neighbors with. And the black residents were not, open and sensitive to the fact that gays were moving into their neighborhood. And so it was kind of very politically incorrect. It was a very politically incorrect film to make, which I think we were both interested in, and looking at how will two minority communities who experience oppression get along or not? Or will there be bigger forces, for instance, class, that will continue to trump? And in the end, class trumped. And but we documented, and for me, that film is it's an incredibly important film because it actually, from the San Francisco Art Institute, I had been making much more experimental films. And this was the film where I sort of, learned about storytelling and fell in love with it. And I didn't know that I had that inclination going in. And part of me was, because I'm actually a very shy person, so it didn't seem a natural fit that I would sort of go someplace and spend all this time with people and document them over such a long period of time. But I absolutely felt like I fell in love with what you learn about humanity when you spend time with people as they are confronting conflict or struggles, and that there is this incredible collaboration that happens when you're in the field and you're filming. And there's nothing that I love more now than to spend time with people and to film them and to sort of capture these moments. Even though I'm still interested in aesthetics and craft and those sort of more art things, I think for me it's about that human connection. And that film, which we thought would be done very quickly, ended up taking 4 years. And we learned the sort of patience and it was, you know, it was a struggle to make, but it's a really important film, and it was actually a film that received an honor from the documentary studies program here. So it has a connection to Duke.
As a self-described shy person, do you see the camera as a buffer between you and others?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The camera. I mean, I'd say two things. I would say, yeah, the camera is a way to articulate how I'm experiencing the world, so it becomes a voice. And it also becomes a conduit for certain kinds of expression, but it probably also provides me, I get to be the observer, the sort of somewhat stepping out of what it is that I'm witnessing.
Roles.
Yeah.
Well, you may be shy, but you surely are intrepid. So what impels an American filmmaker from the Northeast to become so involved? It's been nearly more than a decade now that you have given to the problems of the Middle East.
Well, they're actually not the problems of the Middle East. These are the problems of the United States in looking at the work that I'm doing.
Your work.
Yes, but it's looking at...
But it does reflect the issues of the Middle East.
But it actually reflects America's response to the attacks of 9/11 and what we are doing in the Middle East. So
the real question is, what are you doing there?
Right, what am I doing there? Sometimes I sort of try to contextualize that question in saying, if we had gone into a coma on September 10th, 2001, and you woke up today, and you were to read what's happening. So you'd read, there's a prison called Guantanamo, there's an occupation in Afghanistan that's going on for now more than a decade. We have a kill list, we've legalized torture, and the NSA is spying on us. You would think, like, what happened what happened to the country during that time? And so doing this work, or what the initial thing that compelled me was the war in Iraq and what was happening as the build-up, and it became more and more and more inevitable that was going to happen, and how the media was basically cheerleading for this to happen. And so the kind of failure of leader.
Why do you think they did that?
I mean, I think failure of their profession. You know, I mean, I think that in the sort of wake of fear, or in the guise of sort of national security, everyone fell in line and no one asked any hard questions. And I think it's, I think it's something that we're going to be struggling with for decades to come. You know, I mean, not just the war in Iraq, but other things, Guantanamo, but it really was motivated by, I mean, the real thing was a sense of despair. And a feeling as a documentarian that actually had a role in, that I could do something, that there was something that I could do that could maybe contribute to a different kind of understanding. And probably naively, because I'm still a bit naive, I thought, well, if we understood this world differently, or if we understood the war differently, or if we understood the impact it has on civilians, or if we imagined that those people in Iraq were just like us, that things would change. That we wouldn't, that this kind of killing wouldn't be so easy, or these kinds of wars wouldn't be so easy, or at the very least, that we would feel the burden of them, that this country would feel the burden. And there seemed to be this incredible disconnect between the reality that was happening over there and the fact that we were getting reports, we knew every day 200 Iraqis were dying on the streets, and this was happening. But it didn't seem like the Vietnam War, when actually people were, there was a sense of debate or conversation, or
you may have just been younger then.
Yeah.
Your work examines the lives of people living in some of the most volatile places and regions of the world. And it's sort of hard to accept the definition of someone who has been intrepid in going to these places to document the harsh and violent realities of their life and still remain naive and or shy.
I mean, I'm naive in the sense that I think that if you bring information, or if people have information, that it will impact. I still can't believe we haven't had hearings over Guantanamo or over, like, how is it possible that there haven't even been public hearings? I mean, we had public hearings over Watergate. It was like a break-in. It was like petty crime. It was like little stuff. And people talked, and, you know, people were held accountable. And so, you know, I do think that if we're a country that perceives itself to be founded on a rule of law, that things should be different. But
do you feel the same sense of outrage with issues that relate to public education, women's rights, infrastructure, a long list of current ills? Do you feel involved with those issues on the home front?
Yeah, I have friends who ask me that question because I complain about Guantanamo, and they say, "Have you looked at the U.S. prison system?" And so I am aware somehow my focus has been on sort of what's happening on the sort of global scale.
Well, many times you've risked your own life to tell the story of another. What's the process like for you?
I mean, it's an extraordinary experience because you begin a project with an interest, and then I traveled someplace, and then I'm looking for people who I can document, and then through that story, through sort of this individual story, understand these bigger questions. And what happens is that they actually, I mean, in many cases, in the films that I've done recently, have literally their lives on the line. You know, that when they sort of open up to me, they're risking more than I am. And so there is a profound sense of, obligation that you sort of do it right. There's also, you go on a journey. Like you in the film that I made in Iraq, I went in there with certain ideas about the war and what the occupation meant. But I went in there with those ideas as an American and what my perceptions were there. I didn't go in there as with the idea of what did it mean to live under a regime for 35 years, which is what Iraqis experienced. And so I had to sort of rethink some of my preconceptions in the process of making that film, because ultimately, as a filmmaker, I'm not there to project my belief systems onto other people. I'm interested in learning, and I'm interested in that journey, and I'm curious, and so I'm incredibly, beholden to the people who open their lives to me and my camera.
What is the difference you hope to make? What is the window to a wider world that you have in mind?
Well, I'll give you a very concrete example. So right now I'm working on something that's in progress, and one of the big things I'm looking at is NSA surveillance, which has been, after 9/11, was directed towards the population, the US population. And now they're renewing a piece of legislation that's basically authorized the NSA to do this. I mean, I want there to be hearings. I want there to be a public debate about what does it mean if the government is spying on its citizens. And
have any of your films thus far engendered a wider public debate?
Not to the extent that I would hope that they would.
Well, it's not over yet.
It's not over yet.
Other than your own films, are there any other films that have changed or deeply influenced your own life? There's a whole pantheon I'm very much come out of a cinema verite tradition, which is documenting events and people in real time as things are happening. So there's a sense of not telling stories through interviews of the past, but actually spending time with people as they are going
through some kind of journey, struggle, whatever. And so in Iraq, I filmed with a doctor over the course of an election as he was running for election. In the Oath, which was about Guantanamo and Al-Qaeda, I filmed, there was a military commission happening at Guantanamo. So there's a kind of pulse that moves it forward. And so I'm very beholden to the sort of tradition of cinema verite filmmakers. So people like Frederick Weissman, who's D.A. Pennebaker, the Maysles brothers, that come out of that sort of, they in the 60s, they realized once you could liberate a camera off of a tripod, then the sort of whole drama of humanity is possible to try to capture and film. And they had, what they did was quite revolutionary. And I think it has as much relevance today as it did when they began.
Well, it's affected so much news coverage today, yeah. The handheld camera and the viral material that follows from that. Yeah. What's the best advice you can give to a younger filmmaker?
I mean, I think the sort of traditional things I would say is know your craft, know your skills, know your weaknesses. And then the other thing that I would say is, it's always nice to get in through the front door. But if you don't get in through the front door, there's usually a side door. And you should try to figure out, don't take no for an answer. Try to get, in terms of access or institutions, or, it's not always the way you get in is the way you think you're going to get in. And I think patience and risk-taking, because there is a relationship between what you're willing to risk and what you potentially can accomplish.
What's the best filmmaking tip that you ever received, and do you recall who gave it to you?
I'll have to think about that.
Okay. In the meantime, let's talk about My Country, My Country. Your 2006 film that has been described as the definitive nonfiction film about the U.S. occupation of Iraq. What caused you to create this film?
It was actually an article in the New Yorker that I was reading, and it described the occupation on the ground and what felt like an absolutely tragic predicament with no, that wasn't going to end well, but that it was profoundly tragic because we were going in to do something which was impossible to do. Right? You can't occupy a country to bring democracy, if that's why we were there. I mean, I think there are all kinds of other reasons why we were there, which had to do with oil, which had to do with the fact that they didn't want to invade Saudi Arabia, so they went to Iraq because there were old grudges there, and et cetera, et cetera.
Do you still believe that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was about there's this, in 1992, there was a document written called the Project for the New American Century. I don't know if people are familiar with this. So the Project for the New American Century was sort of post-Cold War envisioning of what American foreign policy would look like. And it looked like unilateral power. So in other words, I was going to swear there, but we don't care about our allies. We're going to do what we want to do. And there's going to be some land grabs along the way, and it was kind of like 9/11 allowed that sort of, they dusted it off, and it kind of became the sort of roadmap for what happened.
Do you think that dynamic will change, or foreign policy will change, now that the United States is the second largest oil producer in the world and on its way to becoming #1?
I think that the dynamic of what's happening is not just about resources. I mean, it is about resources, but I think that the use of fear to justify things such as drones and ongoing, I mean, we're bombing countries that we're not at war with, that we actually say that we're allies with. So we have Yemen and Pakistan, and we're bombing them, and so I don't know that has to do with oil.
Isn't there a lot of evidence that there are many cells in Yemen, and it has become the center of terrorist activity?
I would say that there's a lot of evidence that a lot of innocent civilians have been killed in these strikes. And I think that there's also a lot of evidence that what the landscape of Al-Qaeda radicalism in September 2001 has gotten worse today. But I think you could argue that that radicalization is happening in direct response to things that the United States, that we're escalating, that if you have Guantanamo that's open for a decade, then a new generation is going to become radicalized. And I don't forgive, or I'm not an apologist for that radicalization, but I think the sort of escalation, abandonment of the rule of law doesn't look like it's going to have a happy conclusion to me. It doesn't seem to be the way that you do.
What were your hypotheses going in to Iraq, and how did they square with your conclusions?
I think my big hypothesis was that that Iraqis didn't want us anywhere near there, and they wanted us out. But actually I learned something different, which was Iraqis were really actually, which was something I didn't want to admit, but they actually were glad to get rid of Saddam Hussein. He was a nightmare. And so there were people who were, in a sense, fit into what this narrative is, which is not a narrative that I, agreed with, and who also wanted to participate in a democratic process. However, they were also angry about the occupation and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Iraqis would say to me, it's like, why are you punishing us? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you've been here for years and we still don't have electricity and you can put a man on the moon, so why are you punishing us? Like what's going on?
How did you reply to that?
I said, no, they're actually just incompetent. They're trying. I mean, that the resources that we dumped, we dumped billions of dollars into this country to build it up, to build its infrastructure, to provide. I mean, that money was quite real. I mean, I saw it. I saw stacks of money moving around. I mean, it was money that we could have used here. I mean, huge amounts of money. But they had no, there was always a disconnect between what the sort of outsider experts thought was good for people and what actually local people knew was good for them. And we didn't trust them, and we immediately treated Iraqis as if they were all dangerous, and they weren't all dangerous. And, created these compounds and basically we went in with this idea that we were going to parcel out politics based on ethnic composition of the country. So we'll have, the Shia, the majority, so they'll get more political votes, and then the Sunni are the minority, and we're gonna and then guess what? There became there became a civil war. It'd be like, I don't think that we think in the United States that we should have, votes cast on ethnic, your counts. I mean, there are other things at place, and so it just was a really tragic situation because there were people who were trying to do the right thing and who were risking their lives there. I mean, I saw that. I mean, there were people from the military.
Yourself included.
Yeah, but it was my choice, to go there. So I think and I could leave when I wanted to. There were, the Iraqis couldn't leave, most of them, and if you were in the military, it wasn't so easy to leave either.
Your second film about Iraq, The Oath.
About Yemen.
Sorry?
About Yemen. It's
Isn't that the one that focuses on the two brothers-in-law?
Right, but it was in Yemen, not in Iraq.
Excuse me. About two Yemeni brothers-in-law who appear to have little in common except their service to Osama bin Laden. One is his bodyguard, the other as his driver. How did you find them, and why were they willing to be filmed and interviewed?
Mm-hmm. So this film began. I went to Yemen wanting to make a film about Guantanamo, and I went there with an idea for a story, which never happened. But the idea was that I would find somebody who was being released from Guantanamo, going home. And so how would you leave? How would a person leave there and come home? And that through that story, I would understand something about Guantanamo. And I was also interested in finding somebody who was one of the innocent people there were many people who were sent to Guantanamo who didn't have any ties to Al-Qaeda. And so, but that story never happened. What happened was I went there, and on the second day, I was asked by a person who was working as a translator if I wanted to meet the family of Salim Hamdan. And I knew Hamdan's name because he won a successful Supreme Court case against the military commission. So I said, of course, I would love to meet his family, and then was introduced to...
Did you know what their occupations were then?
I knew Hamdan worked as bin Laden's driver. I knew that. And then I met the family, and the person I was introduced to is a man named Abu Jandal, who worked as bin Laden's bodyguard for 4 years, and he was the one who recruited Hamdan. And I learned on that first meeting that he was driving a taxi cab in Yemen. And there was something in me that was like, okay, this is crazy. Like, why is this guy driving a taxi cab?
Did you believe that? Now I think you're naive too.
Why is he driving a taxi cab? I was immediately like, oh, I would be interested in filming that, but then I was terrified. I mean, it was a terrifying scenario. But I'd been doing a lot of research, and I don't know if people are familiar with Lawrence Wright's book about, it's called The Looming Tower, which is looks at the sort of trajectory towards 9/11 and the history of Al-Qaeda. And he talks about this gentleman, Abu Jandal, in his book, and he's actually a very, very pivotal person, because he left Afghanistan in 2000, before the 9/11 attacks. He had some disagreements with Al-Qaeda. He was back in Yemen, and then after 9/11, he was interrogated by the FBI. Really right after 9/11, 6 days after 9/11, he was interrogated for 2 weeks, and this interrogation became some of the most important intelligence that was gotten in terms of understanding who were the perpetrators. And this interrogation was conducted by a gentleman named Ali Soufan, who's now come public. He's an FBI agent, and who has spoken out against the use of torture, and just said that interrogations using methods of relationship building yield more than those using violence. And Abu Jandal, so Abu Jandal was this pivotal sort of figure. And so then, as I was there as a filmmaker, my thought was, well, this is a really dangerous project. Like, it's dangerous because of who he was. It's dangerous, like, how do you make a story about this? He's dangerous because he also lied, and so how do you make a story about a liar, and all these kinds of things. But I was compelled to do it. And so for a long time, I thought I was making 2 films, one about the returnee and one about the taxi driver, and then it just became the one about the taxi driver. And Salim Hamdan's case, which we filmed at Guantanamo, was very significant because it was the first military commission that happened there. And his conviction was recently overturned. I don't know if people saw in the news a week ago. Salim Hamdan was convicted of material support for terrorism, which was for driving bin Laden at Guantanamo as part of the military commissions. The law that he was convicted under was a law that was created after the fact. It was created to target him, basically. It was a law that was created, I think, in 2006. And in federal court, they basically overturned the conviction. They said you can't create laws on the fly, that you can't just make up categories or make up laws. And so it really undercut, or what happened at the military commission it's really in question now. And it's quite disconcerting because the 9/11 trials are happening right now, and which Obama tried to have in federal court. That was one of the first things that Holder did. It says we're actually going to have these trials in the United States in federal court, that we have a court system that knows how to deal with this, which is true. But now it's happening under a military commission, so we'll see what happens.
Where are these 2 brothers-in-law now? Can you tell us what are their current pursuits?
Right. I'm not in direct contact with them. I always, when I was working through a co-producer, a local person there, so I can't answer that question. I believe I know they're both in Yemen, and they might both be driving taxi cabs, but I'm not sure.
Is one of them an activist in a so-called peace movement or human rights movement?
You know, I don't know. And what I was really interested in is what, if they were active in the Arab Spring, because, you know, Yemen threw out Salah, who was there, and I was thinking, like, oh, I wonder how they processed the Arab Spring, because here was a movement, a nonviolent movement to overthrow dictatorships, and how did the people who came from this jihadi worldview reconcile or relate to that?
You're currently at work on the third film in this trilogy about the way the war on terror has been imported to American soil, including, from your own experience as well, increased government surveillance. Can you give us a preview or even a title, what you have in mind with your current film?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can say a little. I can't talk in too much depth. I don't have a title, unfortunately. What I'm looking at...
You have a working title? What do you call this?
Untitled, really, right now. Untitled. Untitled Part 3 is what it's called right now. But I'm filming with, I mean, the themes are what I think is happening now between state surveillance and it's sort of the dark forces or how it leads to potential authoritarian use of power. And then also these movements and organizations that have emerged in the Arab Spring. So you have a new kind of political agency happening. People can connect immediately, globally, and organize, and can topple power in ways that we've not seen. I mean, the sort of cascade that happened last year with the Arab Spring. And so I'm looking at that, and then also looking at sort of forces of sort of totalitarian state power and how it's used through surveillance. And so one of the people that I'm filming is NSA whistleblower, William Binney, who worked for the NSA, which is the government's spy agency. And
I don't think that's how it's referred to.
The National Security Agency, well, intelligence gathering. And his job for 30 years was to detect foreign threats and to decipher and to break codes. Very, very brilliant man. He was asked to protect us and analyze nuclear threat possibilities. And he quit the NSA after 9/11 because the NSA started using the stuff that he created, because he was the architect of a lot of algorithms that took data and formed graphs so that you could target people. And took his algorithms that he had made and started using them with U.S. population.
Where is he now?
He's in about 4 miles from Fort Meade, which is the headquarters of NSA. He's a very brave man. He's a very brave man.
Can you tell us about some of your experiences with this film and why you chose to edit it in Berlin, where you are partially in residence now?
Mm-hmm. Well, having had my laptop and camera seized at the border, it makes it very difficult for me to trust that I can travel freely in and out of the United States and protect the
Did you
footage.
receive your material back, by the way?
I did receive my camera and laptop 40 days later. They released it. But as my friend David said, you might as well throw that in the Hudson River, you know, because of my computer. So, because one doesn't know what's been done to it during that time. I've become very adept at things like encryption and how to sort of have privacy and communication. And but at the same time, it was a promise I made to some of the people that I'm filming that I wouldn't edit in the United States.
Why did you feel compelled to make that promise?
Well, there have been recent cases of filmmakers being subpoenaed for their footage. I'm spending time with people from the NSA. I asked them, what should I expect is happening to me? And they said, oh, just about everything. Everything we do, we're doing.
Has any of that occurred yet?
Well, so everything we do, meaning if they want to know what's on your computer, they go over the net and they get there. if they wanted it, they'll follow you, they'll do these things. And
you don't need the NSA to do that.
They do it, I think they have tools that we don't know about. And so my NSA friends assure me that given the trajectory of the work that I've done and the work that I'm doing now, that I wouldn't be paranoid to assume that I'm targeted for certain types of surveillance.
Do you feel that you have greater freedom in Berlin?
Well, yes, in the sense that...
Is it freedom or privacy that you're after?
Yeah, privacy. I mean, I think governments are often concerned about those citizens that are maybe being critical of those governments, right? So I'm sure that there are people that in Germany who are critical of the German government, and they're in the same kind of, sort of antagonistic relationship with the government. But I'm not interested. I'm not making documentaries that are exposing what Germany is doing globally. I'm working on the U.S. So it's sort of being removed feels like a safer place for me to work, which doesn't mean it's safer for other people. And I feel like I can protect. I have an obligation to do what I can to protect my material.
Do you believe that we could be having this conversation in many other countries, including those in the West?
Sure, of course we could have this. Yeah, we could have this conversation. I mean, that is something, like, I don't worry.
Forum?
Yeah, and I don't worry that I'm going to be arrested. I'm not, I'm white, I hold a US passport, I have enough attention to my work that it would make it hard for me to be really, feel in danger. But it isn't to say that I don't feel that they wouldn't go after my work. I mean, they've proven to me. I mean, I've been told at the border, they've said, if you don't answer our questions, we'll find our answers on your electronics. And I was threatened to be handcuffed for taking notes. I mean, so they have displayed instances of wanting to know what I'm doing or try to get to my material.
Did you take notes?
Yeah, well. So what happened was that I landed, it was at Newark Airport, and I've been told by my lawyers I should always take notes. I write down what time I'm detained, who's detaining me, and so I got there, I took out my pen, I've done this for years, and they said, put away your pen, and I was like, why? And they said, put away your pen or we're going to handcuff you, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a journalist, I've been told by counsel. And they said, we're going to handcuff you that your pen is a weapon. They said that I was like, that pen there, that I was going to...
That hardly works.
That these guys... And I should tell you, they both have guns. Well, at that point I said, okay, well, I put it away then, and then I got to the next counter, and I said, and I took out my pen, and then they yelled at me again, we're going to handcuff you if you don't put away your pen. And then I was brought back into the screening room, which is a place I'm familiar with. And I asked for the supervisor, and I said, what are you talking about? I'm a journalist, I'm taking notes, I've been told by counsel. And they said, no, you can't take notes, that your pen is potentially a weapon. And then I asked for crayons, and to see if they had crayons. And they didn't, and it escalated. I was outraged. I mean, in a sense, it has been the sort of only way in which I can kind of document or have some kind of agency in a situation where I don't have much. I mean, I don't travel with my laptop. I don't travel with my, I go through sort of extreme measures to return to the United States. But I've always, felt that I could at least document what happens. But at some point, I was allowed to have my pen back, and I wrote down all their names, and I called a journalist when I got out of the airport. And I hadn't gone public. I mean, I talked about it a little, but that was kind of the point that I said, okay, this has gone too far.
On a lighter note, you were one of the featured and well-received artists in the Whitney Biennial of this very year with your installation, Oh Say Can You See, a projection of the imagery of 9/11 with the audio recorded weeks later at the Yankees' come-from-behind Game 4 and World Series victory. And that is what we just viewed. How did you arrive at that jarring juxtaposition?
So if people came in earlier, they would have seen faces, and that there were people who were gathering at Ground Zero. I was in New York on 9/11. I know someone who died in one of the buildings.
Is that the person to whom the film is dedicated?
No, it's actually that's another close friend who sadly passed. And so with this film, I went down there, and it had a kind of, well, the city, I mean, you were there, right? I mean, there was something about, it was, everything that we sort of understood was kind of crumbling down, and there was sort of this sense of like, oh, things could realign in so many different ways, and there was such a sense of compassion on the street, and mourning and sadness and disbelief, all these kinds of things together. And so I went down there, and people were gathering to look at of something that no longer existed, and trying to process what that meant. And there was something in those faces of trying to comprehend the what can't be seen, you know, what is impossible to see, and they're trying to photograph it, but you can't photograph it because it's gone. I mean, the buildings are gone. And so I felt that by looking not at what they were looking at, but looking at them, their faces, not at Ground Zero, that I could try to capture, like, emotionally.
Well, you surely did.
And then,
a very vivid story that perhaps words could never convey.
Yeah, yeah. And the Yankees was also something that if you were in New York, it was this bizarre World Series game, because the Yankees were in the World Series, and they kept having these miraculous come from behind victories. So there was this kind of, it became the kind of things became cathected onto this World Series.
Well, don't you think it was cathartic?
Yeah, it was cathartic.
And really carried spirits somewhat forward, and then almost as surreal as the entire experience.
Yeah.
What are the most important ideas, solutions, values that you have learned from your own films, and what would you like the rest of us to have as a takeaway?
I mean, what I attempt to do is document or spend time with people that open different worlds that we can sort of expand our knowledge, right? And so it's a kind of surrendering of ideology, and trying to really understand, like, what does it mean on the ground, to like people who really understand, like something about lived experience, that it really matters, that we can debate all we want about what we're doing internationally, but actually there are people who are living that, and that can be from people from the military or people on the ground in Iraq, but that the real knowledge is there, and that to document that is and to share it hopefully contributes to a different understanding.
Have you ever been ambivalent about some of your subjects?
Of course, yeah. It's not always about making friends, you know, but it's about finding truth, you know, and even if the truth is something that is not a comfortable reality, but if it provides insight, then yeah, that's my, you know, as a journalist, I don't think journalists should shy away from people or things that they disagree with. I think you try to find something that you provide more understanding, which doesn't mean that I don't have political views, obviously.
One gathers that. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you would care to?
I mean, I'm just so thankful to be here. I mean, I have such a long history with Duke and the Full Frame Festival, and having shown my work, in a sense, having grown up as a filmmaker here, and it's you know, really an honor to be invited and to be able to.
We're happy and honored that you're here. Is there anything? No, I'm going to change that question. Okay. Did you ever expect your life to unfold the way it has?
No. And it's a odd predicament, because in a certain sense it's parallel with very tragic circumstances, you know, and that's happened, and it's quite confusing at times. And the most confusing time is actually with James Longley. So James and I were in Iraq at the same time, and he was incredibly helpful to me. He had been there, he'd gotten there before I had, and we hadn't met there, but we met after. And both our films were received well, and we were both nominated for Academy Awards. And when we were nominated, it was like at one of the most brutally vicious, violent times in sort of the ethnic fighting going on in Iraq. And it's this very bizarre thing, because you're doing work that's being recognized in your field, but it's also work that represents a sort of tragic unfolding of circumstances. So to answer your question, did I imagine that my work would follow this path? No, but nor would I imagine that this country would follow the path that we're following. And I think, as you know, I know a lot of lawyers who've done Guantanamo work, and I don't think that those are not particularly radical lawyers. They're just people who believe in the rule of law and think that there shouldn't be a prison beyond the rule of law. So they volunteered to do Guantanamo work, you know, and they've done that for decades. You know, they go down there and try to fight that. So so there is this way in which there's kind of the path or the momentum of what's happening with history. I've kind of been following that, but it's actually one that I hope changes, you know, soon.
If you had it to do over again, is there anything that you would or might have done otherwise?
Yeah, of course. There's always things that I wish I'd, you know, done that better, been more patient, been, you know, but you know, the work. It's not easy to do, and so I think some of the hardest things are you spend this time with people, and then you go and you make another film, and then I feel like there are these relationships that are built, and then how do you maintain them? And I think that if there's anything that I wish I could do, would be to be able to sort of have more continuity between those the relationships that are built during the making of a film.
Thank you, Laura, for your insights, for your humanity, for this really compelling conversation. Please join me in giving very special thanks to Laura Poitras. Wonderful. And thanks to each and all of you for joining us. So if you are prepared to stay in your seats for 10 minutes longer, we will now be screening 3 video clips from Laura Poitras' trilogy of films on post-9/11 America, including a segment from this untitled work in progress. You'll be among the first to see it, about surveillance and security in America. And here I've been told it's called The Program.
Yeah, but this is actually something I did for the New York Times. So it's using the material that I'm working with. It does have a title, but that title is not the title of the film. So I think we're going to show very short.
So it's The Program for now.
It's a standalone. But I'm going to show a short clip from My Country, and then something from The Oath, and then a piece that I did for the New York Times recently.
Do you want to tell us about the piece for the Times?
It focuses on the NSA whistleblower that I talked about, and I did it because there's legislation that's coming up that I wanted to engage with. Actually, the ACLU is arguing in the Supreme Court on this Monday, about domestic surveillance, and there are laws that are going to be coming forward. So I wanted to enter the public debate while I continue editing.
By the way, what was the name of the writer of that New Yorker piece?
George Packer.
Oh, wow. Did he ever take part in your film?
Yeah, he actually, he's a fan of the film. And after it, he was very gracious. We had lunch before I went to Iraq. He gave me some advice. And then I was very, very happy with the film. Yeah.
If I don't stop now, we're going to be here for a very long time. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, audience.
Why don't you take it with you? Just for a minute.
جماعة وأنكم أمرك الجد. This is type of punishment. This type of punishment, they can't bear it because they are children.
We have looked through every one of these files. These juveniles are dangerous.
يا أخي الحبيب الغالي الكور أبو حبيب، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. طالت الأيام والسنين وما بقي إلا الله الواحد القهار الذي يقول الشيء كن فيكون.
I was breaking different codes and data systems and doing data analysis against